Montana, 1888. There is a kind of arithmetic that governs a life and another kind that gives it value, and the two are rarely the same. Samuel Blackwood understood the first kind. He understood the number of days since the fever had taken his wife, Sarah, and their boy, Jacob. 1,825. 5 years. He understood the number of fence posts that marked the border of his land, the number of cattle that bore his brand, the number of dollars saved in a tin box under a loose floorboard in his silent house. These were hard, certain numbers. They were the facts of his world. His life was a routine built on such facts. He rose before the sun, the chill of the floorboards, a familiar shock to his bare feet. He made coffee, strong and black, and drank it standing by the window, watching the gray light spill over the eastern peaks of the Crazies. The house behind him was always still. It was a good house, built with his own hands for a family of 3. Now, it was just a space that was too large for one man and his dog, Cole. The silence in the other rooms was a physical presence, as solid as the stone hearth. He had stopped expecting things. It was the easiest way. He did not expect warmth from the stove until he had fed it wood. He did not expect a crop from the earth until he had plowed and planted it. And he did not expect comfort or companionship or the sound of a voice that was not his own echoing off the pine walls. To stop expecting was to stop being disappointed. It was a simple, brutal kind of peace. Cole, a black and tan shepherd mix of indeterminate origin, would press his head against Samuel's leg as he stood at the window. The dog was his only constant conversation. He would tell the dog about the weather, about the weak fence line near the creek, about the hawk he saw circling overhead. The dog would listen, his tail thumping a slow, steady rhythm against the floor. Cole did not demand answers. He only offered presence. It was enough. After coffee, the work began, and did not end until the sun had bled out behind the mountains. Mending tack, clearing stones from the north pasture, splitting wood until his shoulders ached with a satisfying burn. He ate his meals alone, simple affairs of salt pork and beans, or bread, and whatever jerky he had on hand. He moved through his days with a deliberate, unhurried competence. He was a man who knew how to fix what was broken, whether it was a pump handle or a horse's thrown shoe. But he did not know how to fix the emptiness that had settled in his chest. So he did not try. He simply worked around it, the way a river works its way around a great, unmovable stone. The grief was no longer a sharp thing. It had dulled with time into a constant low-grade ache, a part of the landscape of himself. He kept Sarah's shawl and Jacob's first carved horse in a cedar chest at the foot of his bed. He did not open it. He did not have to. He knew what was inside. He was 45 years old. In the arithmetic of his life, that number felt final. It was the age of a man whose story was mostly written. The remaining chapters, he assumed, would be much like the ones he was living now. Sun up, sun down, winter, spring, summer, fall, the turning of the earth, the slow march of days. He did not fight it. He had stopped fighting the day he stood over 2 fresh graves on a windswept hill. One Tuesday in late spring, he was riding his fence line, the one that bordered the old Miller place. The Millers had sold out 2 years back to a young couple from the East, the Vances. He had heard the husband, a man full of big ideas about logging, had been killed in an accident the previous winter. A falling tree. Samuel had nodded when he heard the news in town. It was a hard country. It did not care about a man's plans. He saw the wagon first. It was tilted at a dangerous angle on the rutted road that separated his land from hers. A woman stood beside it, her hands on her hips, staring at the rear wheel. 2 small children, a boy and a girl, sat quietly on a patch of grass nearby, watching their mother with wide, serious eyes. He urged his horse, Gideon, forward. He did not want to interfere. Neighboring was a delicate thing. Too much felt like meddling, too little felt like indifference. He aimed for the space in between. As he drew closer, he saw the problem. The axle was snapped clean through. The heavy wheel leaned inward, useless. The woman wore a simple calico dress, faded from sun and work. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and dust smudged her cheek. She looked tired, but not defeated. There was a set to her jaw that he recognized. It was the look of someone who had run out of choices but had not yet run out of will. He drew Gideon to a halt a few feet away. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She turned. Her eyes were a clear, steady blue. There was no panic in them, only a weary assessment of her situation. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, nodding. She knew who he was. "Looks like you've got some trouble." It was a stupid thing to say. The trouble was plain as day. "The axle snapped," she stated, as if providing a field report. "Been threatening to for a month. Today was the day it gave up." She did not sigh or wring her hands. She just stated the fact. Samuel dismounted. Cole, who had been trotting alongside Gideon, went to the children and sat, letting the little girl, who couldn't be more than 5, reach out and tentatively stroke his fur. The boy, a few years older, watched Samuel with a guarded expression. He knelt and looked at the damage. The iron was sheared through, a clean, brutal break. "This isn't a roadside fix," he said. "I know," she replied. The phrase was simple, but it carried a weight of understanding. It meant, "I am not a fool. I see the same reality you do." "Where were you headed?" "Town, for flour and salt. We're out." He stood up and looked from the broken wagon to her small ranch house, visible a quarter-mile down the road. The place looked weary. A shutter hung crookedly from an upstairs window. The fence around the yard was missing slats. He could see the barn roof had a patch of tar paper held down with stones. He knew the look of a place that was too much for one person. "I can tow it back to your yard," he offered. "Got a chain at my barn." She looked at him, her blue eyes searching his face. He expected her to refuse, to offer a polite protest. Pride was a fierce thing out here. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she said simply. "I would be grateful." He just nodded, mounted Gideon, and rode toward his barn. He didn't have to help, but the sight of her standing there, so resolute in the face of a broken world, had stirred something in him. A feeling he hadn't had in a long time. It felt like purpose. He returned with the chain and a strong draft horse. The work of rigging the wagon was awkward, but they managed it. She did not stand aside and watch. She grabbed a rock to block the good wheel, anticipated when he needed a hand lifting the broken axle clear of the ground. She worked with a quiet competence that he respected. She knew the mechanics of things. They got the wagon back to her yard. The 2 children, Thomas and Lily, followed at a distance. When they stopped, the boy, Thomas, came closer. "You fixed it?" he asked, looking at Samuel. "Just moved it," Samuel said. "The fixing is a bigger job." Eleanor Vance, he knew her name was Eleanor, wiped her hands on her apron. "I can't offer you payment, Mr. Blackwood." "Wasn't expecting any," he said. "Just being a neighbor." He saw it then. The flicker of relief in her eyes quickly masked. She was a woman drowning, but she was too proud to call for help. "I'll come by tomorrow," he found himself saying. The words surprised him. "I've got a forge. Might be able to weld that axle. If not, I can fashion a new one." She hesitated for a moment. "That's too much to ask." "I'm not asking," he said. "I'm telling you." A faint smile touched her lips. "All right, then." He left her there standing in the yard of her struggling ranch and rode home. The silence in his own house seemed deeper that evening, more pronounced. He made his supper, but his mind was on the broken axle, on the steady blue of Eleanor Vance's eyes. The next day, he returned. He worked for hours at his forge, the heat and the clang of hammer on steel a familiar comfort. He couldn't repair the old axle, the break was too severe, so he forged a new one. It was hard, slow work. By the time he was done, his arms felt like lead and his face was black with soot. He took it over to her place. She was in the yard, mending one of the broken fence slats with a piece of twine. It was a temporary fix, and they both knew it. He fitted the new axle. Thomas watched him the entire time, silent and observant. When he was finished, the boy spoke. "You know how to do everything," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Samuel just grunted. "Not everything." Eleanor came out with a jar of cool water. She handed it to him. "Thank you," she said. It was all she said, but it was enough. He started finding reasons to be over there. The next day, he saw her wrestling with a loose post on her corral fence. He rode over and spent the afternoon digging it out and setting a new one. He didn't ask. He just did it. It became a pattern. He would finish his own chores and find his feet, or Gideon's hooves, turning toward the Vance place. He fixed the broken shutter. He replaced the missing slats in the yard fence. He told himself it was just neighborly. He told himself it was because he hated to see a good piece of land go to ruin. He never announced his arrival. He would just appear, a quiet figure on his horse and set to work. And she, in turn, developed her own quiet response. A jar of water would be waiting on the porch railing. Sometimes a plate with a piece of cornbread or a few slices of cold meat would be beside it. They rarely spoke more than a few words. "Fence post by the creek is loose." "I know." "Roof patch won't last another winter." "I know." There was a whole language in those two words. "I know the work is endless. I know I am failing. I know you see it, and I thank you for not saying it out loud." One day he was working on her barn roof, replacing the tattered tar paper with proper shingles he'd had in his own shed. It was hot, painstaking work. When he came down the ladder, Eleanor was waiting with two plates of food. She motioned for him to sit on the porch steps. She sat on the other end, leaving a respectable distance between them. They ate in silence. The sound of the children playing in the yard filled the space between them. It was a comfortable silence. He realized with a jolt that he was not lonely. For the first time in 5 years, the ache in his chest had receded to a dull thrum. He finished eating and stood up to go back to the roof. "Wait," she said. He paused. "The children," she said, not looking at him, but watching Thomas and Lily chase a butterfly. "They ask about you. They call you Mr. Sam." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and went back up the ladder. But the name echoed in his mind. Mr. Sam. It was a name that belonged to someone. It was a name that implied a connection. His visits to town became a source of low-level anxiety. He knew people were talking. He saw it in the way Mr. Albright, the owner of the general store, watched him over his spectacles. One afternoon, Samuel was buying nails when Albright leaned over the counter. "Heard you've been putting in a lot of time over at the Vance place, Samuel," he said, his voice friendly, but his eyes shrewd. "That's a good thing you're doing. A real good thing." "Just being a neighbor, Henry," Samuel mumbled, counting his change. "Of course," Albright said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Still, a widow with two young ones. That's a heavy load." Just then the door opened and Marcus Thorne walked in. Thorne was a prosperous rancher from the south end of the valley. He was a man who understood arithmetic. He had the biggest herd, the most land, the fanciest buggy. He was handsome in a smooth, polished way that Samuel instinctively distrusted. Thorne nodded at Albright, and then at Samuel. "Blackwood," he said. His eyes lingered on Samuel for a moment, too long. "I was just out by the Vance property." Saw you were still working on that barn. A man could spend a lifetime fixing that place and never see the end of it." Samuel didn't reply. He gathered his nails. "Truth is," Thorne continued, addressing Albright but clearly intending for Samuel to hear, "the woman would be better off selling. It's no place for her to be on her own. I've made her a fair offer. More than fair, considering the state of things." Samuel felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He turned and walked out of the store without another word. The ride home was long. Thorne's words circled in his head. A fair offer. It was the language of ledgers and deeds, of profit and loss. It was the arithmetic of the world. It had nothing to do with the look in Eleanor Vance's eyes when she said the word home. That evening, the silence in his house was unbearable. It pressed in on him. He opened the cedar chest at the foot of his bed. He lifted out Sarah's shawl. It still held a faint scent of lavender. He ran his hand over the worn wood of Jacob's toy horse. He had built a life here. He had loved and lost it. He had accepted the silence. He had made his peace with it. But now the sound of children's laughter from a neighbor's yard had unsettled that peace. The quiet competence of a woman who refused to break had reminded him of a strength he thought he had forgotten. He was helping her, but the unsettling truth was she was also helping him. She was pulling him back into the world of the living, one plate of cornbread at a time. He didn't want to feel it. Hope was a dangerous, fragile thing. He had buried his hope on that hill 5 years ago. It felt like a betrayal to dig it back up, a betrayal of Sarah, a betrayal of Jacob. He closed the chest. He went outside and stood on his porch, looking across the dark expanse of pasture that separated his house from hers. A single light burned in her kitchen window, a small, defiant star in the vast darkness. He was a fool. He was a 45-year-old man getting tangled up in a situation that was not his to own. He should stop. He should go back to his routine, to his safe, predictable solitude. He didn't have to go back there tomorrow. He didn't have to finish the roof, but he knew he would. The next day, he was on her roof by sunrise. He worked with a grim determination, driving each nail with a sharp, definitive blow. He was just finishing the last row of shingles when dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He saw her walk out of her house and toward the fence line that marked their properties. She just stood there, her arms crossed, looking out at the mountains. He climbed down, his knees aching. He walked over to her, stopping on his side of the wire fence. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The crickets began their evening song. "The roof is done," he said finally. "I saw," she said, her voice quiet. "It's a good job. A proper job." She turned to face him. In the fading light, he could see the strain around her eyes. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her voice steady but holding a new fragility, "I cannot pay you for this work, for any of it." "Didn't ask for pay," he said, his standard reply. "I know." She took a deep breath. "But I have to say it. Things are difficult. The bank sent a man out last week. My husband took a loan against the property for his logging equipment. Now that he's gone, they want their money. They're calling it in." Samuel's gut tightened. He thought of Thorne. "Mr. Thorne has made an offer on the land," she continued, confirming his fear. "He says it is a sensible offer, a practical one. It would be enough to pay the bank and give me a little to start over somewhere else." She looked down at her hands, twisting them together on the top rail of the fence. "I don't want to sell." Her voice was barely a whisper now, all the fight gone out of it. "This is my children's home. It's the only home they remember." She finally looked up at him, and her composure, the steady wall she kept around herself, finally cracked. Her blue eyes were swimming with unshed tears. It was the first time he had seen her vulnerable, The first time she had let him see the sheer weight of what she was carrying. "I don't know what to do," she confessed. He stood there, a wire fence separating them, feeling utterly useless. He could fix a roof. He could forge an axle. He could set a fence post. But he did not know how to fix this. All the practical skills he had were worthless against the cold arithmetic of a bank loan. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were inadequate. She gave him a watery, tired smile. "It's not your burden, Mr. Blackwood. You've already done too much." She turned and walked back toward her house, a solitary figure retreating into the twilight. He watched until the kitchen door closed behind her, leaving him alone with the chirping crickets and the vast, indifferent sky. He rode home in a fog. Her confession played over and over in his mind. "I don't know what to do." The words echoed in the empty rooms of his house. He paced the floor, from the cold hearth to the dark window and back again. Cole whined softly, sensing his master's agitation. This was where his help ended. This was the line. He was a neighbor, nothing more. It was not his place. He sat at his kitchen table and did the arithmetic. He was 45. She was 32. A 13-year gap. That was a number, She had 2 children. He was a man who had already lost one. That was a fact. Her ranch was drowning in debt. His was solvent, but not rich. To take on her burden would be a risk, a foolish, impractical risk. He thought about his life, the careful, quiet order he had built from the wreckage of his past. It was a lonely life, but it was safe. There were no surprises, no hopes to be dashed, no hearts to be broken. To step across that fence line, to take on her trouble as his own, would be to invite chaos back into his world. It would mean opening himself up to the possibility of loss all over again. He was too old for that, too tired. His heart was a scarred and brittle thing. It was not made for this. The sensible thing, the practical thing, was to do nothing, to let her sell to Thorne, to watch her and the children pack their belongings into a wagon with a new axle he had built, and ride away. He would go back to his life. The fence would be mended. The roof would be fixed. But the light in that kitchen window would be gone. The thought was a physical blow. He realized with a terrifying clarity that he had come to depend on that light. He had come to depend on the quiet ritual of her gratitude, on the unexpected sound of a child's laughter, on the shared silence of 2 people who understood the weight of the world. He was a fool, a sentimental old fool. He buried his face in his hands. What was he thinking? This wasn't some story from a book. This was life, and life was hard numbers. It was profit and loss. It was survival. He went to bed, but did not sleep. He lay there staring into the darkness, listening to the house settle around him. It was the sound of emptiness. The next morning, he rose with a headache and a sour taste in his mouth. He did his chores automatically, his mind 1,000 miles away. He decided he would not go over there. He would keep to his own property. He would reestablish the border. He was checking the water level in the stock tank when he saw the boy, Thomas, walking across the pasture toward him. The boy moved with a serious purpose. His small face set. He held something in his hand. He stopped a few feet from Samuel. He didn't say hello. He just held out his hand. In it was a small, crudely carved bird. It was made of soft pine, the knife marks still fresh. "I made this," Thomas said, "for you, for fixing the roof." Samuel took the bird. It was warm from the boy's hand. It was misshapen and clumsy, but he could see the care that had gone into it. He could see the effort. "Thank you, Thomas," Samuel said, his voice thick. The boy looked up at him, his gaze as direct and clear as his mother's. "Mr. Thorne came by again this morning," he said. "He talked to Mama on the porch. He said he was being generous." Samuel's knuckles went white as he gripped the small wooden bird. "Mama cried after he left," the boy said, his own voice wavering just a little. "She didn't want me to see." But I saw. He kicked at a tuft of grass. Are you going to let him make my mama cry? The question was a clean shot, straight to the heart. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, honest inquiry from a child who believed Samuel could fix anything. It was a question of value, not arithmetic. It bypassed all of Samuel's careful calculations, all his sensible doubts. Are you going to let him make my mama cry? He looked down at the wooden bird in his hand. He looked at the boy's earnest, worried face. He looked across the field at the small house with the newly shingled roof. And he knew. He knew he had been counting the wrong things. The numbers didn't matter. The age difference, the debt, the risk. It was all just noise. What mattered was the stubborn set of a woman's jaw. What mattered was the trust in a small boy's eyes. What mattered was the feel of a home, even a struggling one. He had been a man living in a house. Eleanor and her children were a family looking for a home. The two were not the same thing. He made his decision. It was not a sensible decision. It was not practical. It was terrifying. But for the first time in 5 years, it felt right. It felt like coming home. No, Thomas, he said, his voice firm. I'm not. He walked the boy back to the fence line. He told him to tell his mother he would be by that evening after supper. Then he went to his own house. He washed his face and changed into a clean shirt. He opened the tin box under the floorboard and counted the money inside. It would be enough, just enough. That evening, as the sun began to set, he walked across the pasture. He did not ride. He walked. He wanted to feel the earth under his boots. He wanted to take the measure of the distance he was crossing. It was more than a few hundred yards of grass. It was the distance between one life and the next. She was on the porch waiting. She must have seen him coming. She stood as he approached, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression unreadable. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He didn't know how to say what he had come to say. He had no talent for pretty words. He only had the truth. Eleanor, he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. She flinched just slightly. I have some money saved, he said, getting straight to the point. Enough to clear the bank loan, and enough to buy some good breeding stock to build up your herd. She stared at him, her eyes wide. Samuel, no, I can't let you do that. I could never repay you. This isn't about a loan, he said. He took a breath. This was the hardest part. These two ranches, they run together. The fence between them is just wire and wood. It would make more sense as one property. He looked her straight in the eye. I'm a man with a house that's too big. You're a woman with a home that's too much to carry alone. I'm asking if you'll let me help you carry it. He paused, the words catching in his throat. I'm asking if you'll marry me, Eleanor. The silence that followed stretched for an eternity. The world seemed to hold its breath. He could hear his own heart pounding in his ears. He had laid his entire broken self at her feet. He had nothing else to offer. A slow smile spread across her face. It was not the tired, watery smile he had seen before. This one was real. It reached her eyes, and they shone with a light that pushed back the twilight. I was hoping you would ask, she said, her voice soft but sure. She took a step toward him. I told you. I can't pay you for the work you've done, Samuel. I can't pay you for this, but I can offer you a home. He felt a lifetime of tension release from his shoulders. He walked up the steps and stood before her. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her, memorizing the moment. Eleanor, he said again, just to hear the sound of it. Samuel, she replied. The next day, they rode to town together in her wagon. The children sat in the back, quiet but radiating a nervous excitement. Their first stop was the bank. Samuel paid the loan in full. The banker, who had been so grim with Eleanor, was all smiles and handshakes with him. Samuel just nodded and took the paid-in-full deed. Their next stop was the preacher. They were married in his small office with his wife and the children as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony with simple words that carried the weight of a life-changing promise. When they walked out onto the street, Samuel felt like a different man. The sun seemed brighter. The air felt cleaner. He was a husband again. He was a father. The thought was both terrifying and wonderful. They went to Albright's general store to buy the flour and salt that had started it all. Mr. Albright saw them walk in together, saw the new rings on their hands, and a broad, genuine grin split his face. "Well, I'll be," he said, beaming. "Congratulations to you both. The very best to you." Marcus Thorne was there, near the back of the store. He saw them, and his face soured. He turned and left without a word. Samuel felt a quiet satisfaction. The arithmetic of value had won out over the arithmetic of dollars and cents. 1 year later, the fence between the two properties was gone. The land flowed together, one seamless ranch. The herd was larger, healthier. The barn was repaired, the house was painted, and the yard was a place of laughter and chaos. Samuel was teaching Thomas how to mend a bridle on the porch. The boy was 10 now, and his hands were growing strong and capable. Lily, at 7, was helping Eleanor in the garden, her bright hair a splash of sunshine against the green leaves. Cole lay on the top step, his tail thumping, watching over his new, expanded flock. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the noise of a family, the sound of running feet, the slam of a door, the murmur of conversation around the dinner table. At first, the noise had been jarring to Samuel. He had grown so accustomed to the quiet. But now the silence was what felt wrong. The noise was the sound of life. It was the sound of home. That evening, after the children were in bed, Samuel and Eleanor sat on the porch swing he had built. It was the same time of day, the same view of the mountains as that evening a year ago when she had confessed her troubles at the fence line. They sat in a comfortable silence, the swing moving in a slow, easy rhythm. She rested her head on his shoulder. He felt a profound sense of peace settle over him, a peace he had thought was lost to him forever. He was no longer a man living around an empty space. The space had been filled. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly. "Just thinking," he said. "About what?" He thought for a moment. He thought about the numbers. 46 years old, 1 year of marriage, 2 children, 1 home. They were good numbers. They were the right numbers. About how a broken wagon wheel can change everything, he said. She smiled against his shoulder. "It wasn't the wheel, Samuel. It was the man who stopped to fix it." He put his arm around her and held her close. He didn't have to say anything else. She knew. You see, there is an arithmetic that measures a life in years, in dollars, in acres of land. It is the logic of the world, the kind of counting that men like Marcus Thorne understand. It is a math of practicality, of profit and loss. By this measure, Samuel Blackwood was a man past his prime, taking on a burden that was not his, for reasons that made no practical sense. The numbers were all wrong. He was too old. She had too much debt. It was a foolish investment. But there is another kind of arithmetic, a deeper and truer kind. It does not count years, but character. It does not measure wealth in dollars, but in kindness. It does not calculate risk, but sees value. This is the arithmetic of the heart. By this measure, Samuel learned to count differently. He learned to add the value of a woman's resilience, to multiply the worth of a child's trust, and to understand that the sum of a family is infinitely greater than its individual parts. He thought he was simply fixing a ranch, but what he was really doing was rebuilding a home, and in offering her a future, he was reclaiming his own. He learned that a home is not just a structure of wood and nails, but a fragile thing built of courage and hope. It is a place where you are needed. It is a place where your presence matters. He learned that the greatest poverty is not the absence of money, but the absence of purpose. The story of Samuel and Eleanor is not about a grand romance. It is about the quiet, steady courage it takes to stop counting the reasons why you shouldn't and to listen to the one reason why you must. It is about the choice to believe that the broken things in our lives can be mended and that the quietest places in our hearts can, against all odds, learn to be filled with noise again. It is about finding the grace to accept a gift you can never repay and the wisdom to understand that sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer another human being is simply a place to belong. Thank you for your time and attention. It's you, the listener, who keeps this channel going, and for that, I am truly grateful. It means the world to me to know where this voice is reaching, so if you feel inclined, let us know what country you're listening from today. It's a small way for us to feel connected in this vast world. Until we meet again in the next story, I wish you peace, I wish you strength, and I wish you a life measured not by its arithmetic, but by its value.